Well, Jack, should we get started?
Well, sure. Yeah, this was an idea partly just to show off what we've been doing, and I'm grateful to Paul James for the idea and the organization to pull together the Knoxville Shoebox project, which is an ongoing thing. It may never end, but the idea is that we're trying to fill in the gaps in Knoxville's photographic history. We have a lot of great photographs, especially in the Thompson collection and other collections of a lot of the same things. But there are a lot of things in Knoxville history that we have no pictures of at all, and that came home a few weeks ago when TV stations were asking us if we had pictures of Cumberland Avenue, for example, in its heyday. And we didn't. And we started asking around and finding out that everybody remembers Cumberland Avenue. People remember going there hundreds of times, the nightclubs and all those things, the Roman Room and the Last Lap and all those things, but never took a picture of it, or at least never saved it in a place that people could access it. So we're really just casting a wide net to see how many pictures of Knoxville history we can find. Pictures of houses, pictures of buildings, pictures of people. It's surprising how many people who were fairly prominent in Knoxville history are people we don't know what they look like because we don't have pictures of them. Among them are James White, of course, 200 some years ago, but also Patrick Sullivan, who died in 1925. I've never seen a picture of the guy. He built Patrick Sullivan Saloon. He was a kind of a prominent community leader, but there may be a picture of him out there somewhere. But we don't know. We're looking for as many pictures as we can having to do with Knoxville history, so we can use them and also make them available for other historians to use them. And we're not offering any money for this, but we're offering credit. Every time anybody uses the picture, it'll be from with your name on it. But that's what we're trying to do with this. And tonight we're just showing kind of the best of the Knoxville Shoebox collection. And like I say, Paul James has done the lion's share of the work on this, and is I have him to thank for the idea and the execution of it. So I appreciate it, Paul. Do you want to go ahead and start the show now?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. It's always Shoebox is a lot of fun in all its forms. Start off with our usual introduction. Our mission is to research, preserve, and promote the history and culture of Knoxville. If you join us for the first time, welcome. And if you're joining us, which many of you are, most of you are, in fact, for the second, third, 50th, 80th time, or 100th time, we welcome you back. If you're not too familiar, though, if you go to our website, knoxvillehistoryproject.org, and go to the Engage site section, go to History Happy Hour. That's where all our recorded sessions for our Zoom talks, about 70 of them, I think, are on there. And while you're on the same page, if you go down to Knoxville Shoebox, we haven't done this for a while, and we're going to do this start this month, actually, next week's kind of off newsletter week, reintroducing new images with new captions. So and we post them on our new Knoxville Shoebox page. We appreciate any sales in our online store or make a donation, and many of you already support us, and we thank you for helping this nonprofit do programs like this to share back to the community. So Jack and I are going to kind of tag team it, really. I'll leave most of the history to him, but I'll also chip in about some of the people who've shared images, and also how they relate to other collections that we have, and how that's kind of grown over the years. This fella here, we will meet him towards the end. A little surprise for you if you don't know who he is. So this is the first one. I will tell you how we came across it. Actually, I was invited by Cindy and Mark Croto, who have shared many images with us over the years. I'm sure Cindy and Mark's on tonight. If you are, hello, guys. They asked me to do a program, and this was the last program that I did at Shoney's on Chapman Highway before everything shut down in the pandemic. And there was this fella called Bernie Wallace who had a couple of great photographs. And you can't really even do justice just seeing it this small on the computer. But this is just an amazing photograph of Knoxville Brewing Company in the 1890s. What can you tell us, Jack?
Yeah, this is a great picture in a lot of ways. This is the old Knoxville Brewing Company, obviously. It was in an area of town that hardly exists anymore. It's between downtown and Mechanicsville, under what's now the highway. It was on the corner of McGee and Chamberlain down there. This was the largest and most long-lived of several breweries in Knoxville history. And if you look at it, you can see a lot of things. Study this. There are hipsters of the 1890s in there. If you look closely at the faces, and it's a biracial group as well. But you see on the horses, they have the New Knoxville Brewing banner there, and the guy up at top is King Gambrinus, who was kind of the
What
king
about
of
it?
beer in those days. But that was a depiction of kind of a sort of like a Mardi Gras sort of type figure, but in Knoxville, obviously preparing for a parade, probably down Gay Street. But I would love to know more about the people in this picture, little girls to old men to everybody. Everybody seemed excited about Knoxville beer, and it did have a good reputation. This Knoxville beer across the southeast until it was shut down by state law in 1909, I think it was. But this was an interesting thing that was down in an area that we don't think about much anymore. And there were some buildings down there for a long time, almost all of it's taken down now. Recently, it was a homeless camp down in this area. And look, in the foreground, we see both horses and goats. Goats are carrying the smaller wagon there. All right, this is the post office at Emory Place. Our friend Beth Wolf shared this one a couple of years ago. Emory Place, of course, is the place at the very north end of Gay Street. And it's now called Emory Place. Back then, it was Emory Park. Actually, was the name of the place. But they had an individual post office back in the early days of postal delivery until the 1880s, I think it was. You had to come downtown to pick up your mail and to mail things. But beginning the 1880s, we started having neighborhood delivery and some kind of satellite post offices outside of the downtown area. So this was kind of a rare picture of that. Fellow postmaster James Ash is the guy in the black hat at the center there. But if you throughout tonight, if you recognize anybody in any of these pictures, please let us know, and we'll identify them in future presentations.
Hey, Jack.
Yeah.
I just want to say that James Ash, he was served 12 years as a postal carrier and then became the superintendent of carriers, and later the postmaster for Station A, as you see here, and then also he was the finance clerk, like being the assistant postmaster as well.
Yeah, he worked his way up.
Yeah.
A Ray Geologer story, sort of, at the time.
Apparently, he recollects, according to the family recollections, that this post office building, and we'll see a modern view of it in a minute, they believe it was built just after the Civil War. But the Ash family bought it in 1892. That's an interesting. So maybe they own the building and turn it into a post office. Does that sound right?
Well, the park didn't exist, and well, actually, it was the old Central Market, is what it was originally, and that was established in the 1880s, and that's what later became Emory Park. The Central Market was basically meant to be a public-private partnership, but it meant to compete with Market Square because it was considered to be more convenient both to the new residences on the north side and also to the farmers coming from the northern counties. It was gonna be considered a cleaner, nicer, more convenient Market Square, but it was a terrible failure. There were accusations of corruption and so forth, and it finally closed down around 1904, which is when it turned into Emory Park, named for Reverend Isaac Emory, who'd been killed in the Newmarket train wreck of 1904. So when the post office went in exactly, I couldn't swear. I would be surprised if it was as early as soon after the Civil War.
Probably the 1890s, I think, from the notes I'm looking at. The interesting thing about this building is it's kind of in an interesting shape. You can't really appreciate from this photograph, but hopefully you can a little bit in this next one. James Ash he did a little schematic of it in 1920. So it has this kind of two-sided front to it, and it goes back, whatever that shape is. I can't remember, but It's now the Lilienthal Gallery, and you can just see one side of it here, one side of the front. I took that a few years ago actually.
So
And what it looks like today, I think it's grey now, isn't it?
maybe so. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
kind of a trapezoidal building, really unusual shape. As you see a lot of unusual shape buildings in downtown Knoxville, especially on the fringes of downtown, where the streets go in different directions. This, of course, is where very close to where Central and Broadway come together.
So for
So,
Knoxville Shoebox, we look for photographs, but also love for illustrations, maps, brochures, any type of kind of ephemera on unusual pieces that kind of add more context to the stories we're looking at.
all
This is
right.
one of my favorites of recent ones too. Is Robert Lindsay Mason. I guess it's his granddaughter, Anne Weinstauer. Some of you may know Anne, the friend of ours. She's been collecting as many items that Robert Lindsay Mason took. But you want to talk a little bit about Robert Lindsay Mason, Joe?
Yes, he was an interesting kind of maverick among Knoxville artists. He was younger than a lot of the Nicholson Art League, who we talked about before, the Impressionist era folks of the late 19th century. He kind of went his own way, although he sometimes intersected with them in his efforts. But he was a very serious young artist. He was actually involved with art in Knoxville from his teen years, and was a caretaker for the women's building at one time, which had the closest thing we had to an art gallery. But he went and studied with famous artists nationally, like Maxfield Parrish. He studied with him, and also Howard Pyle, the famous illustrator. And in fact, Robert Lindsay Mason became kind of associated with the Howard Pyle studio up in Delaware, even though he kept his studio here in Knoxville, I think on East Cumberland East Church, on over near where the Coliseum is now, but had a teaching studio over there, and many Knoxville artists, especially the 1920s, went through Robert Lindsay Mason's teaching studio. Remarkably, for an artist, usually with the people I've known in my life, including myself, are either image people or word people. Robert Lindsay Mason was a really good writer as well, and you can really see he had a sense of adventure, a sense of flair for describing things. And he wrote this early book about the Great Smokies before it was formally opened as a national park in the late 1920s. This got a little bit of a national stir, this book, in that time, and but it's a very interesting book about the Smokies before there were proper guidebooks. So this is what he's probably best known for, even though he devoted his life mainly to visual art. He was one of the first people to do art of the Smokies, and actually gave lectures about that subject to the Nicholson Art League back in 1915 or so, before it was even easy to get to the Smokies. Only artists, people are really dedicated, were taking the time to camp overnight and trespass and do all the things you needed to do to get to the Smoky Mountains. And he was one of the early ones, along with Charlie Crouch, who was older. But very interesting guy. I would love to find out more about him. He later had a studio in Fort Sanders, and up until the time he died, as a result of a car wreck in the early 50s. But
Jack, I included this because I don't think I've ever seen a picture of him before either.
I don't think I have either. Honestly, it's the first time I've ever seen a picture of him.
And here's a couple of photographs that he took. We believe downtown Knoxville. Don't know too much about him, but
Yeah. And if you know about it, again, if you know about any of these, anything we're not talking about, please let us know. And here's a Robert Lindsay Mason picture of UT as he knew it from over in the Fort Sanders area. This is what it looked like before the trees were grown up. And while only one of those buildings is still standing, and you may be able to guess which one it is. It's the one on the left of the crest of the hill up there. That's South College is still there, but the rest of them have been torn down and replaced with other buildings, especially Ayers Hall, which is kind of takes over the whole crest of the hill at the top there. Very interesting picture. And another one from maybe around the same time. We were trying to figure out whether what are these these enclosures, these shelters on either side of the older buildings, but we're not utterly sure what those are. Probably just for outdoor lectures or activities. and of course Ayers Hall during construction. And the contractor V.L. Nicholson, who was well known here at one time, his grandson, I think, Ed Nicholson, shared this with us. Was there? Nixon was involved in construction for many years here in town, and I think on construction of Ayers Hall. And this is right as it's being completed. A very rare picture of Ayers Hall, which was completed in 1921 and named unexpectedly, named for Brown Ayers, who had been the president of UT and had kind of had championed the construction of this building. His proposal was it be just called the administration building, and but he died unexpectedly in early 1919, his early 60s, and they fairly a popular choice was to name this landmark building, this symbol building of UT after Brown Ayers.
What I like about this photograph too is that these were shared by Ed Nicholson, who owns Buckhead Construction in Bearden. And I guess it was his father or his grandfather, V.L. Nicholson, who was a contractor on a bunch of buildings. I guess Morgan Hall on the Ag Campus and Tennessee School for the Deaf in South Knoxville. And also this one as well. Another lovely photograph of KUB building, which we were just talking about, Jack and I, before we came on.
Yeah.
Bauman and Bauman architects.
Yeah. Does anybody remember that building? Well, in fact, it's kind of still there, but it hasn't looked like this since it got a major facelift in 1964. But it looked very modern by early 50s standards when it was built. With that streamlined design and almost Jetsons sort of thing there. But by 1964, it was old fashioned. I think it had some insulation problems and that sort of thing. They decided to just kind of rebuild the building all around. It's an old building, actually, late 19th century building, but they ended up kind of building this big kind of green framework around it, which has recently been redone again. But if by Tom is now the headquarters of the Tombrus company, the kind of PR and company that's well known. But but that curved structure is still there, and beneath it, I know because I saw them building the new Tombrus building. All right, okay. Here's the Catholic Church and Old St. Mary's School in the foreground. I just finished reading Cormac McCarthy's *The Passenger*, and there's a very brief mention of St. Mary's in the book. But it's this was Cormac McCarthy's home church, Immaculate Conception, and many others people's as well. Thousands of Catholics have gone to church and to school here. There was a parochial school back in the days when, well, actually, it's kind of the forerunner of what we know as Catholic high school, I guess. But this is up on top of what we know is Gallows Hill. By the time they were building the church, they were starting to call it Summit Hill. But this is the oldest church building downtown today.
And the building on the left, Jack, we believe, was the nunnery in one end, on one side, and the school on the other. We're just not sure which side, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of people around. They didn't close until the early 70s, so there are a lot of people around who remember going to school there. We just haven't we didn't think to ask them exactly what part was used as a school. But this is a West Vine, and if you went farther to the west, you would get down to Ironstein Jewish Community Center and Temple down there as well. And
this is a picture you don't see too often. Thank you to Mary Kay Volvogel.
Don't see it ever, actually. This is the best picture I've ever seen of the interior of the auditorium skating rink, which is kind of understating what it was. This was our first civic auditorium. This was built in the very early 1900s. The city was very proud of it for a while. This was a big public building for public events. Like when Teddy Roosevelt came to town, he gave a talk inside this building, and remarked across the street that he'd just seen John Severe's grave, which meant something to him. But it was a financial disaster, and they decided to convert it into a skating rink, and that's what it was for several years after that. It was a roller skating rink, and was pretty popular for some years. And it was one thing that was kind of unusual and maybe unique about it in some ways was that they sometimes showed early silent films inside here while you were skating around. You could watch a movie or two. But that was there for a long time. It was later. Some of you may remember, be old enough to remember when this great big Quonset hut style shaped building on the corner. By the way, I didn't mention it was the corner of Main and Gay Street. That's exactly where it was on the northwest corner of Main and Gay. Was now part of the Baker Courthouse area. But this was later on in the 1940s. Was the streetcar barn? This is where they stored the streetcars when they weren't in use. It was finally torn down in the early 1950s, I believe. This is where they later built the Trailways bus station. All right, and up at Fountain City Park, which is a fun place to go any time of week, any time of year, but especially for special occasions. But for a while, they had a merry-go-round there. And I don't know exactly where it was in connection with the rest of the park, but that was one of the many attractions of that. But that's still a very lovely park. I think it's probably one of the prettiest parks in the region, as far as I'm concerned, is a old-fashioned park where they used to have events for Labor Day and Fourth of July and things like that. And the Rose Avenue School. Anybody remember this building? This was later known as Staub School. It was a public school over on in the western part of UT campus, at Rose Avenue, but it was dated back to around 1900 or so. This building had a lot of uses over the years. For a while, it was used by the medical college, and they had cadaver dissections in there. But later still, it was for about a year. This was the Webb School of Knoxville in 1957 or so. And our friend Finbar and other people might remember those days. They say that it was kind of a hazard to have Webb School here because if you had a free period, all you had to do was walk a couple of blocks away and you go to Bally's Pool Hall and get in some trouble, and come back to school uh, with your teachers none the wiser. But that was part of the story of Webb Schools looking for a home that they finally found in 1959 in West Knox County off Neighborhood Road. But we'd love to know if you know of any of those students in that picture, anybody look even sort of familiar to you. We'd love to identify as many people as we can.
As I recall, this came from a scrapbook that Cindy and Mark acquired. I think that's how it came to us. These were pretty small little photographs. The next one's a postcard, Jack, and we've had quite a few postcards shared with us, including well, this is Cindy and Mark Proto again, but we've had this several times. This is probably one of the nicest quality ones of this shot. I remember seeing this on the web years ago, and I thought it'd be great to have a copy of that. And now we have multiples. And I'm talking mostly digital. Most of our Shoebox collection is digital, and that's the point of it. But we do have a good friend in Bearden, Alec Riedel, who has donated his postcard collection to us. We probably have about 600 of Alex. And also he's able to share some other digital collections. So I don't know how many postcards we have, probably 1,000, 1,500. And we use them a lot. I mean, some of them don't get used, but we're always trawling through them in programs, in books, and publications and talks where we use these a lot. So we appreciate people sharing with us. And this is just a beautiful hand-tinted photograph, probably a Jim Thompson.
Yeah,
and the watermelons are pretty interesting, aren't they, Jack?
Yeah. If you don't know, we're looking north from Union Avenue, basically on the east side of Market Square. And of course, on the left side of the picture is the old market house, which was torn down about 60 years ago now. But yeah, we for some reason think this picture was taken in 1929. We don't know for sure about the year, but we know about what time of year it was because of the watermelons in the foreground. But that watermelons kind of caused a problem because they were so bulky that suddenly they need a lot more space for the market, and they would have what they call Watermelon Row, which is spilled a block to the south, which is exactly where the farmers market spills to the south today. That was the part south of Union Avenue was called Watermelon Row because of all this, the big bulky produce came in and around July, and that's when they had to make it bigger than the old Market Square could handle. Yeah, a lot of stuff. You can see the old Albers. If you look closely, about halfway down the right side of the picture, the old Albers Drug Company with the mortar and pestle on the top. That was George Washington Albers' retail shop. It was his brother, A.J. Albers, who founded Albers Drugs. But up on the very top is a mortar and pestle structure that was still there till about 30 years ago. I don't know what happened to it, but the building is still there. The mortar and pestle is gone now.
I love this photograph because it's a nice postcard. It's great that the fireman statue is in there in its original location, and you might want to say something more about that. But I do want to recognize Adrian Webster. She's our bookkeeper and our former neighbor in our old building on Gallows Hill, and she brought this collection of about 20 or 30 postcards to us about 6 years ago, and we decided to scan them in, and we created our very first digital collection in memory, I think, of her aunt, wasn't it, or her grandmother, Lib Cooper. So that's how Knoxville Showbox got started. I don't know, 2018 maybe. So thank you to Adrian for getting the ball started, and we've probably got several copies of this since, but still a lovely postcard, and thanks to Adrian.
Yeah, this is the original the original courthouse that you may notice it looks smaller than the current old courthouse because they hadn't added the wings onto either side yet. I think they did that after, it was after 1910, 1920, around that time. But it's got a couple of interesting things on the ground. One are the cannons back there, which seem to have appeared soon after the Spanish-American War and are believed to be gifts from Admiral Dewey after his visit here in 1900 to dedicate the birthplace of his hero, Admiral Farragut. I think for many years, people were embarrassed that Knoxville didn't have cannons on its courthouse lawn like every other southern city does, because we couldn't have decided about whether to put Confederate or Union cannons. But after the Spanish-American War, these cannons materialized. They're naval cannons. There are two different stories about where they came from. The most likely one is that they were Union cannons from Mobile, Alabama, that kind of secured the harbor that Admiral Farragut had won in that dramatic battle. But the other thing to notice is the fireman statue. You may recognize that. You probably will recognize that if you ever drive on Summit Hill Drive, because that's where it is now. It's in front of the fire hall downtown. But for many years, it was later on at Emory Park, which is what we're talking about a few minutes ago. But that fireman statue was dedicated, I think, after some of the first fireman fatalities in 1904 or so. And as you see, it had a fountain that horses could drink out of in the bottom there. I don't know that they still use that for that purpose, but that's where it was for a while. It seems to have for a while it was in front of Old City Hall, where LMU is. So it's traveled a lot more than statues usually travel. And if they move the fire hall again, I guess they'll move it again. But it's been in 4 different places downtown. This was the first one. A classic picture of Gay Street. Gay Street is just constantly fascinating to photographers then, and fascinating to us today. The one thing about we get a lot of pictures of Gay Street, and every one is different and every one is valuable. We don't get any pictures of the street 2 blocks to the east, which is Central Avenue. I've seen only 1 or 2 pictures of Central. That was the Bowery. That was where all the saloons and the brothels were. And I would love to find pictures of Central Avenue, if anybody has any at all. I was kind of amazed when surprised when I wrote the Old City book a few years ago that I could not find any pictures of Patrick Sullivan's Saloon before about 1960. And it had been there since the 1880s. But nobody bothered to go down there. That was considered kind of not quite as proud a part of Knoxville as Gay Street is, even though Sullivan Saloon is as fine a building as any on Gay Street. But anyway, this is just a great old picture of Gay, and you'll notice the Miller's building on the left. This we can date this to some degree because that was uh, about 1904, 1905. They built that building. Uh, our big, very popular department store. They soon built another addition onto it to the north side, and then still another addition. So that's a much bigger building today. The first two additions are done in this original Beaux-Arts style, but the third edition was done in kind of an art moderne style that you can see very. It looks very very different today. But those caryatids were honored and kind of rebuilt by Dwayne Grieve when he redid the Miller's building. Some we backed up a couple slides, Paul, when when he redid the building. He's Dwayne Grieve is the guy that I think is singly most the architect most responsible for the very complicated business of both securing that building, which is owned by multiple owners, and rebuilding it for modern office uses, which is what it is today. I still pay my KB bills, by the way, in that building. There's still a slot there on the Union Avenue side.
Here's another of Alec Riedel's postcards he shared with us pretty recently. And I've never seen a postcard myself in our collection of Knoxville College. And I think we had four from Alec a few weeks ago. So this
Yeah,
is a really nice hand-colored one at Knoxville College, I thought.
yeah, real rarity. Knoxville's historically black college, opened in 1876, and this is one of the main buildings on top of the hill there. It's a great thing to have in the collection. I think that's McKee Hall, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, probably from the very early 20th century. Oh, this is a bit of a mystery. This is the Andrew Johnson Hotel. Did the Andrew Johnson Hotel actually have a swimming pool? It sure looks like it did in this picture, doesn't it? And I think I saw this picture some years ago and assumed that it did have a pool that was added to the hotel at some point on that kind of plateau sort of area jutting out from the hotel. And but some people question whether the swimming pool existed. It seems like it should be something fairly easy to nail down, and we probably could with about an hour of research or something. But I just putting this together, we realized we don't know for sure whether the swimming pool was just a nice idea or something that was actually enjoyed. But this appears to be about 1960 or so, and it would have been a good time to try to pump up your downtown hotel appeal at a time when motels were taking up a lot of the business for people who were coming to Knoxville to visit the Smoky Mountains or for other purposes.
If it was true, this seems like it would have been on the backside, right?
I pictured it being kind of on the north side to some degree, but I'd have to go back and go up and look at it. I looked into this about 10 years ago for a column or something, and I can't remember exactly what I figured out about it. But it looks like a lot of fun. That's all we know for sure about it.
Yeah, I forgot to say Andrew Johnson Hotel on the slide, but it definitely says that on the back of the postcard. So
Yeah.
when intended, that's what it was.
This was by the way, the tallest building in East Tennessee until the late 1970s. Premier hotel for about 50 years until it closed about 1980.
Well, here's something completely different. Someone handed you this about 2 months ago at Maple Hall, Jack.
That's right.
Rosalind
Yeah.
Hackett, in fact.
Yeah. Love when that happens, and I often don't get to look at things much at public events, but this a rare uh, signed photograph of Grace Moore. Grace Moore, our best known singing, she was kind of the Mary Costa of the 1920s, I guess, our opera star, but it was also a Hollywood star in the early 30s. She was, in fact, the first woman to be nominated for a musical Oscar in 19 for an Oscar for a musical role in 1934 or so for a movie called So This Is Love. But she was a beautiful young woman. She was born in Cocke County, lived in Knoxville for a short time in her early youth, and later moved to Jellicoe with her family. Jellicoe claims her to this day, and but she was a big star in New York and Hollywood, in the 20s and 30s and early 40s. She was killed in a plane crash in about 1947 or so with a I think a Scandinavian prince or something in the plane with her. But they made a movie about her. She was kind of a very briefly kind of a legend, and she's now almost utterly forgotten. They made a movie about her in the early 1950s with Katherine Grayson playing her and Merv Griffin as her love interest. And they had the big premiere for that movie at the Tennessee Theater in 1953, 4. And that was when they named the Grace Moore Cloverleaf, which was our first interstate cloverleaf. And we thought this was going to be famous forever. And of course, it was only there for a few years. And we don't name cloverleafs anymore anyway. But anyway, interesting, tragic life. Glad to have that picture. All right, Burlington Barbershop. I've actually had my haircut there. I think they're still doing business, and over in Burlington in East Knoxville. It's a great old barbershop picture from probably about 1930 or so. Yeah, May 6, 1930. I just noticed the date. But it's especially interesting because of the guy in the very back. There's a guy standing in the very back, and see if you recognize this fellow. That is, we're pretty sure, Mr. Kaz Walker, standing by the restroom. But he might have been there getting his, waiting to get his haircut, maybe just going to the bathroom. But he was probably making friends, as he was good at that, and of course was our longest term city councilman in history, and also was kind of an impresario with the radio. Was the guy that later discovered Dolly Parton, who thinks he hung the moon and the stars to this day. But other people have different opinions of him. But interesting guy who made millions in the grocery business. All right, Union Avenue, Market Square. This is the same old Market Square, and there's the Market House again. It was torn down after some damage from a fire, torn down in 1960. But it was actually already targeted for demolition before the fire. But you can see in the background the Peter Kern building. And one interesting thing, if you look closely, that sign on the third floor of the Peter Kern building says Ledgerwood Dance Studio. And this was a time when, at the time of the Astaire and Rogers musicals, and everybody was wanting to learn how to dance, like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And they had a dance floor up there on the third floor of the Kern building. Of course, that's the Oliver Hotel today. But this was taken by an artist named Joe Parrott, who had his own story, was the resident or in-house artist for the Tennessee Theater back in the days when when theaters had artists who they wouldn't just use posters sent to them from Hollywood. They actually had artists who made posters to advertise movies, and it was very short-term art. It was large structural things that were often put in the lobby of theaters, and they lasted for just sometimes only 3 days or so until they were taken down and usually just thrown away. But would love to, if anybody knows of any of Joe Parrott's work. Joe Parrott Jr., by the way, is an accomplished artist himself. He's done some great work in oils of old buildings in downtown Knoxville, especially around the Jackson and Gay Street area. But one other thing I just noticed about this picture is in the background, you see the old Roxy Theater. I think if there are any men out there over 90 or so, you remember the Roxy, which was a legendary place for both for unclothed women and for rats. But it was a burlesque house. They showed boys cowboy movies in the daytime, but at night it turned into a kind of a wacky burlesque house with off-color comedy and dancing girls in various states of unclothed clothing or unclothedness. But that was the Roxy Theater. I think it closed in the late 40s. It was torn down in the late 50s. But it was a legend for a couple generations of young men in downtown Knoxville, as mentioned in Cormac McCarthy's Suttree, and also in David Madden's book Bijou. So it's a theater unlike any other. There are probably by this time 9 or 10 movie theaters downtown. Roxy had its own story.
And if you didn't say, this was taken out of the window of Joe Parrott's studio.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been the old Fouché block building, I guess. That was there.
The next two or three are from the Post Sign Company, which we may have talked about before.
Yeah, yeah.
This
And
is our
this
block
is
now. This is where KHP's office is.
yeah,
Right
yeah. This
about here.
is
Right about
yeah.
here.
You're right. Yeah, that's right. We're looking kind of south or southeast on Gay Street from near where my car is parked right now. I hope it's still there on the viaduct. But there's a streetcar in the foreground. The and a lot of interesting old cars. It looks like probably 1930s. I'm thinking. But this was after the level of the street was raised, so you already have some the underground Gay Street aspects on both sides of the street, really.
And the
But but
200 block.
but the 200 block is utterly gone now, and this is a rare picture of if that is is puzzling to people. That is because that block is just gone today. The 200 block. And it's partly being rebuilt as what
Lone Tree Saloon. The Lone Tree Pond.
Lone Tree Alley, yeah, or whatever they call it. Yeah, the Lone Tree project over there.
This has been in the news lately, or the site has.
Yeah, yeah. The C.M. McClung Company, and this was a big deal, a major wholesale company that was almost like Sears Roebuck. They had big catalogs that sold literally thousands of different items. It says hardware, stoves, supplies, but they say that you could build a Model T Ford out of what you could buy at CM McClung. But they had not a national, but mainly a southeastern clientele. And there's a fingerprint on that picture. I wonder if we could identify whose that was. But it, of course, is right by the freight yards, very convenient for that. But that's the Broadway viaduct, I think, in the background. But yeah, it's just too bad we lost that completely after it was in the process of being redone, or at least the owner said he was working on it. But one fire after another just destroyed that entire block of 7 or so buildings there. It was a great loss, and I think kind of a challenge to the idea of the rights of property owners to take their time with what they say they're going to do. Here are a couple of pictures we ran across. We ran across when we were working on the Bearden book. This is Kingston Pike, when it was sometimes better known as Dixie Highway. And Dixie Highway, of course, was a very long road that went from the Midwest down to Florida. Dixie Highway went through Knox County for about 20 miles, and this was part of it. They used the Dixie Highway flare to advertise their garages here. A big billboard for spark plugs back there. I can't tell that it even is advertising a particular kind of spark plugs, just saying spark plugs are great. But anyway, Kings Pike looks very different today. Obviously, you can see the beginning of commercialization of this formerly kind of rural pastoral area. And a Goodyear billboard in the background as well.
And we could about place it, Jack, because that sign on the left, it's cropped, but it's saying Highland Cemetery, I believe.
Oh, okay. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to picture it going the other way, but that would be we're looking east, right? So Highland Cemetery is over to the north of where we are now. Highland Cemetery was a brand new thing in the 1920s. Where this block might be, I guess this might be maybe Homburg Place, or just a little bit to the east of there. That's
Yeah, so
my
maybe the Wayside Inn is in the distance there. I don't know. It can't be far away.
we might be on the east side of Wayside Inn, if that is the fastest way
Right.
to get to Highland Cemetery. So we
And
might be just on yeah.
here's another
Yeah.
one as well.
another one in the same direction. Actually, we might be able to put these together and make some sense of them. But this was an interesting picture to begin with, and we ran across this when we were looking for the the beard, looking at the Bearden book. Jody Davis of Post Sign Company shared this along with many other great Post Sign Company signs. Post Sign Company would take pictures of their signs just to for their records and to show people what they could do. But they happen to take this picture, and in the side is an interesting building in African American history. The Curry family. A lot of people in you grew up in Bearden remember the Currys, a very large black family that lived right on Kingston Pike in what's now the Homburg Place area. And the best known member of the Curry family today is Clifford Curry, who is the soul singer who had a hit in 1967 or so called "She Shot a Hole in My Soul." But he began his career as a doo-wop singer in Knoxville, actually at Old Vine High School, or not Vine, but Austin High School on the east side of town. They had a doo-wop group of singers, and he began his career as a singer and actually was writing songs when he was still a teenager. But later made a whole career in music. Died just a few years ago, and I'm sorry I never got to interview him. But this is where he grew up, right here. But this is the Homburg Place area. The Homburg Place, especially the kind of the eastern half of the Homburg Place area, was a place called the Brickyard, which was a predominantly African American part of town. And they called it Brickyard because many people who lived there worked in the Brickyard, which was just to the east of here, over near where Kroger is today. And here's another shot of again from the same direction, looking east a few years later. This is early 1950s probably. It says "Welcome to Knoxville," and this is kind of overstating a little bit because you don't actually enter Knoxville until about a mile after this. Over at Carr Street was the city limits. But this is about where North Shore Drive intersects with Kingston Pike today. North Shore wasn't really there yet, but Weisgarber was, and Weisgarber went off to the left there. We see La Hardy Drugs, which is well known, and a lot of people remember that place. But this is downtown Bearden, more or less, is what this is at Kingston Pike and what's now North Shore, kind of at the eastern foot of Bearden Hill. And you still see that rise that goes up to where Bearden Elementary School is.
Something completely different.
Yeah. We're back downtown now. This is a really rare picture of the People's Tabernacle, and our friend Mr. Perry on the West Coast shared this picture of this.
Going out now.
It's with us now, yeah.
This was founded in the. It has a fascinating background. It was founded in the 1890s by a British reformer named Reverend Robert Bateman. It was a mission church. He put it in the most dangerous part of town, which was the Bowery area, where all the saloons were, where all the murders were. You see here's a picture of it at a distance. The Bowery area was where they had sometimes a murder or two every night down there, and police were told not to ever patrol the place in singles. They had to go down in twos because you had to have, if one of you got killed, you had to come back and report what happened. But the Bowery, it was a very brave guy, Robert Bateman. He went down there, and he was maybe brave in another way when he went to back to England to check into penal penitentiary conditions in England. Was going to do some kind of report about that, and was on his way back in 1912 and got on the wrong ship called the Titanic, and he was the best known, I guess, Knoxvillian to have been lost on the Titanic. They had a special service for him in that little church after his death there, and they played "Near My God to Thee" because that story was going around already at that time that it was Robert Bateman who founded the People's Tabernacle, who asked the band to play "Near My God to Thee" as the ship was going down.
Apparently, this church was displaced by urban renewal, Jack, right?
That's right. It was displaced by urban renewal and rebuilt on Central as a simpler center block building, which is still there today. And last I knew, it was being used as a theater. So it's still there. And this is Reverend W.E. Perry, who I guess was the second of only three pastors. Is that right, Walt? Um, there were only it was that was church was still there until just a few years ago.
I just said that on the left, my grandfather, he was pastor there for 50 years. And then to the right is my dad, who at one point early in his career was the associate there at People's Tabernacle.
Yeah, it was a great legacy. I appreciate that very much.
It's a little different, not too far away.
Yeah, just around the corner, actually, down in the old in what was known as the bottom, and you can tell why it was called the bottom. It was the part that flooded, and this is just an area to the east of the old city, basically, where a lot of, I think, the poorest of the poor, most but not all of whom were African American, lived in the bottom area, and it was the part that flooded almost every year. If you believe the memoirs that have been written about this, including one called "Road Without Turning" by a minister who grew up here. I'll remember his name in a minute, but
Reverend Robinson.
Was it Robert?
Robinson?
Robinson, that's right, Robinson. Yeah, and
great book.
Yeah, it's very vivid and unsparing in detail about what it was like to live through these floods. And he said when they're just, you know, they're just awful. The smell and the dead things floating around, and they sometimes knew that they were going to have to maybe get on the roof to survive it. But they just kind of got used to this cycle, and we're grateful to finally be able to move up the hill a little bit. But this is a rare and important picture, I think, to remember those days. And this was a part of town that a lot of Knoxvillians just didn't know about. And you saw some reports about deaths down there, but not a lot of attention was paid to the bottom area in the 1930s and 40s.
It's all going to be where the baseball stadium is now, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
Here's another one on Willow, which is a bit different, but Cindy Proto has this collection. We're not sure who took these, but somebody, presumably in the 30s, went around all over town taking photographs of buildings in poorer neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would guess it was probably a part of a New Deal initiative or something, because there were a lot of initiatives to try to study the lives of the poorest in various cities, and this was this very interesting collection of buildings that had never been taken pictures, never been depicted in photography before, probably is invaluable, and we're grateful to the Protos for finding these for us. This is about 6 blocks east of the old city area. Okay, yeah, the same era, but something very different. This was a rare picture of Franklin Roosevelt riding in a car down Henley Street, and you can see him waving his hat very characteristically. In 1940, this was, I think, the second or third time he came to Knoxville, but the most famous time, because this is the time that he went up to dedicate the Smoky Mountains National Park, which had been around for several years, but he went up to Newfound Gap and gave a big speech with kind of on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina to just dedicate this already very popular park. And there are a lot of pictures, a lot of well-known pictures of him there at Newfound Gap, but this is a rare picture of him on the way. And we're getting into our South Knoxville book, and this is there's a bit of a story about him meeting the architect Alfred Klaus at Little Switzerland on the same car ride. And Klaus, the architect from Germany, who was built all those unusual modernist buildings up there on Little Switzerland, was glad to be able to meet Roosevelt. And he said Klaus was one of the very few people in the world who ever was very close to both Roosevelt and Adolf Hitler, because in his youth he had been in the same room with Adolf Hitler in Munich. But he favored certainly Roosevelt. Klaus actually was helped with the war effort on this side, even though he was fighting against his people in his native Germany. All right, this is the 600 block of Gay Street in the 50s. Of course, we're looking south toward the Andrew Johnson Hotel. And we were talking earlier about the KUB building, and they're actually in constructing it in this picture, that kind of curved modernist looking building that we showed earlier is just being built at this time, because that structure is still there today, and it was uncovered and then recovered in the Converse project a few years ago. But you see Clark Brothers Piano Company, they're well known, of course. Bertha Walburn Clark, that was her husband, his business, Bertha Walburn Clark, who founded the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. And of course, Baum's Florist is on the right, and that was significant for several reasons, including some as a gathering place for Smoky Mountains hikers in the early days. But also across the street is the Blue Circle. Some of you may remember the Blue Circle chain. That was a little hamburger chain, not unlike Crystal, but that was over there, and that building is still there. And it was a florist in rather recent years. I think it is there anything now. I can't remember if there's anything right there right now, but
it's empty right now.
Simple little building. But
of course, the Rowboat Man statue is about here.
Yeah,
on that corner.
Okay, back to South Knoxville. This is Missy Thompson at Log Haven. She's the lady that built Log Haven, that unusual community of log cabins back in the woods off of Candora and what that other street that leads up there from UT Hospital. But she has a fascinating story. She was a woman whose husband had left her with a couple of kids to raise, and she had an idea to build some log cabins on site, and also move some log cabins from elsewhere, and build a little community of log cabins for people to rent. And that's how she made her career, renting out these log cabins up at Log Haven. And this for many years was kind of a place known to draw interesting eccentrics, including Bert Vincent, the New Sentinel columnist, and who else? Over the years, a lot of, including Alfred Klaus and his wife, lived up there as well.
Blanchard.
Lowell Blanchard, the WNOX guru who founded so many careers, Chet Atkins, and all, and was connected to so many well-known country music people. But later on, Chris Whittle and Phil Moffett, who owned Esquire magazine at the time they moved into Log Haven about 40 years ago or so. So it was known for all these interesting creative endeavors over the years, but kind of off the radar of most people who didn't know someone who lived there. But lately, the Assan Foundation actually saved Log Haven from development by an out-of-state developer who just wanted to build some big condos there. Saved Log Haven and has repurposed it as sort of an artist's community. You can get a scholarship and go study art of your choice, or go up and work on your projects, work on your novel, work on your paintings, there's even a choreography studio there if you want to work on your dance moves or something. But it's a fascinating project they're doing up there, and I applaud them for saving the area. And thanks to Martha J. McDowell for those great pictures. And okay, it's this is a fun one for this week, especially Stone Man and Woman. I haven't seen one that creative this week. Have you all? It's at the corner of Caswell Street, 4th and Gill, in the 1950s. So one says man, one says, I'm not sure what it says, but
Snow Woman, maybe.
Okay, here's
Uh,
some great pictures from the late 40s that we came across. Jackie Willard, maybe with us tonight,
You were with us tonight, Jackie?
but
Usually is.
these are that's one of the best street pictures of four
Yeah, I'm
dudes
here.
Hey, Jackie.
just hanging out on the sidewalk that I've ever seen.
Thank
Uh,
you.
but this is across the street from the Holston building, which is very recognizable in the background there. And on the left, and of course the Tennessee Theater with Key Largo playing at on the right there. But yeah, great pictures.
Earlier on, Jack, we were talking about Joe Parrott's studio. He would have been on this block on the left here where the History Center is now. No, no, I'm sorry. It's a street down. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
We're
No, yeah,
a block away.
yeah, we're a block away.
I was mixed up about that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I'm trying to remember what that
Jackie.
was on that corner. That is the Touche building there. There was the old an antebellum, they think, commercial building that was torn down in living memory, certainly 1990 or so. It was torn down and only later became a place for the History Center to expand.
Jackie, do you have any comment? You just want to unmute?
Yeah, here. I think maybe you all told me that the picture of the Tennessee Theater was taken from a billiards hall, which would make sense because my uncle spent time there. My dad and his brother, we do refer to them as Bowery boys. They grew up downtown.
Yeah, that's great to know. You're right. That's the old Comer's Pool Hall is where that was, and that was a legendary place. And I know that because I just read Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, and even though it's set in New Orleans, they're always talking about Comer's Pool Hall, and they say the best cheeseburger I ever had in my life is at Comer's Pool Hall, and all these people in New Orleans happen to know each other, and they find out that they're all from Knoxville, and they have Comer's Pool Hall stories. So it's of course Comer's is a big part of Suttree as well. Dr. Cormac's earlier book that's more directly about Knoxville. But yeah, it was I associated with Jack Comer, who also founded Dean Hill Country Club. So he kind of covered the waterfront of entertainment in Knoxville for a long time.
I think all the young men in the picture were people my dad went to high school with at Knoxville High School. I'm thinking one of them might be Red Richter. I'm thinking
on the right, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's him. I mean, they showed up throughout my childhood at parties my dad had, but I don't remember who they are.
That looks enough like him to be. That might be Red Rector. That's fascinating to know. That adds a whole different wrinkle to that picture. I just thought it was one of the best picture I've ever seen of young dudes on the street in Knoxville.
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Rector, great mandolinist. Yeah, very famous in years to come. Red and Fred, and but he lived to play at the World's Fair and elsewhere. But I should have guessed that was who that was.
We'll take another look at that. We'll blow it up. Thank you, Jackie.
Well, thank you guys. I enjoyed seeing my dad's pictures show up here.
We're kind of getting into the home stretch now. We've got not that many to go. But we had a wonderful collection shared with us by Ross Moll several years ago from Ukraine, I think he was, Jack, wasn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. He was in the army when he came here, but he was just had some time off, and he thought, "Gosh, what an interesting city!" Even though a lot of it's kind of abandoned, and he took a lot of pictures of Jackson Avenue, which is a part of town that no Knoxvillian ever took pictures of in those days. So, but these are some of the earliest photographs, good photographs we have of the old city area, and just because this guy who was here in the army, I think he was doing some sort of job during the Vietnam era.
Psychologist, army psychologist.
Yeah, had some time off and just did some walking around and taking some great pictures. But that is one of the earliest photographs of Sullivan Saloon I've ever seen. But the next one is the old on the left is the old is very familiar in many ways. Looking again north from where my car is parked right now on Gay Street, the Sturkey building on the left. But in the foreground is the old Southern Railway headquarters building, and there was a matching, not exactly matching, but similar building, both in the Second Empire architectural style, a really unusual style for Knoxville at the time. But they were built, I think, in the 1870s or 80s by Southern Railway to be, or by its predecessor, East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad, to be administrative buildings. So those were big losses. They were both torn down without a lot of comment in the mid 70s, but they would be priceless if they were still there. Those old buildings that people would get excited about if they were still there, and they're also subjects of Joe Pera Jr.'s paintings as well.
You know, what's good about this photograph, and it's small, but you don't see too many photographs of the Park National Bank, and you can see it on the horizon. That's another interesting facet about this, and the 200 block as well.
Yeah, 200 block still there.
1974, it says at the bottom.
Yeah, that's before they built Summit Hill Drive, right before, actually.
Yeah, just around the corner.
Yeah. Frank Provenza, he was an Italian immigrant who had a little sandwich shop down on Central Street, and next to that is what they call the Slock store, SLOC. They used those letters for various purposes. It was a Jewish immigrant family, I think, from Lithuania, who ran a secondhand clothing store there, and their SLOC was meant to stand for spend less on clothing. But they enjoyed the joke that in Yiddish, slock means junk, and that's what they sold. But they did all right there for some years. It's kind of well known. That building, by the way, is unusual on the block because that's the old livery stable. That was where that was the last livery stable in Knoxville was right there, and that's why it's kind of more open than a lot of buildings are in the front. And it didn't close until 1935, before the Slock folks opened the store there.
And that's where the Crown and Goose was, right, Jack?
Yeah, that's right.
So Frank's place would be a pretentious beer, I think now.
That little beer garden area there.
Yeah, right here. There's a couple by Bradley Reeves, good friend of ours, with his own media archives.
Yeah, and helped restore it. That kind of dates it to the early 70s when the Bijou Theater was almost torn down. People were embarrassed about it. It had been a porn theater for several years and said, what good is this? But some people really believed in it. And the people who believed in it came together to save it, and they founded what we know today as Knox Heritage. But it's a great thing that they saved it because the Bijou is really one of the premier venues in Knoxville, especially for the Big Ears Festival and things like that, because the acoustics, as only a few people noticed before this period, are nearly perfect in that room. And this is a jewel we could have lost, and most people wouldn't miss it, but it was kind of reinvented as something even greater than it seemed in its earlier days. But the Bijou, of course, was built in 1909 and was a vaudeville theater, had Broadway shows. Had a lot of premier, a lot of good stuff there through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. But kind of fell on hard times in the early 60s as downtown and in general was kind of collapsing, and kind of that's how it ended up as a porn theater.
It's funny, you hardly ever see photographs of this block in many areas, but the blue circle's there again.
Yeah,
twice in one night that we've seen it. Right. We hardly ever see it.
Yeah.
AUB building there, of course.
Yeah.
Here's another one from Bradley and Beard in the 70s.
Yeah.
Great shot.
Picture of
great shot.
A very different movie theater. We got into the history of this. It looks like just nobody would have thought to take this picture. It looks like a junky commercial billboard shot. But today, looking back on it, I remember Shoney's Big Boy and the Capri Cinema that began as the Pike Theater and then kind of reimagined as sort of one of the first cineplexes in Knoxville. I guess we can date it to Rocky. That would have been 1976 or so. So that's right about when that was. But this is just to show that we're interested in even recent stuff. As Paul has observed, we actually have more pictures of the 1890s and the 1920s than we do of the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And that's one thing that if you've got some great pictures of something like this that may not seem beautiful or great value, it might be of great value to someone today to be able to see how all these things came together. So please share it, no matter how old or how recent it is. It might be useful to a historian in the future. Next one.
We're actually going to show the last photograph, or the last two or three. And, of course, we said this was the best of Shoebox. And Jack and I think, are in agreement that the next several pictures are just amazing. And it just tells an amazing story, and how they arrived at us. And it's just incredible that these photographs landed up in our hands, really. But here's no, actually, I tell a lie. We'll go to that. There's one more, I think. This came in just a few weeks ago. Jaron Giffey has sent us a bunch from Bearden since the Bearden book came out. And I love this one because this is right down the street from where I live in Rocky Hill, North Shore and Wallace Road, which is all iced over right now. But there is I think Manor House Assisted Living on the corner there. And I love I've got a picture of this on my fridge, actually. So if you have photographs like this from the 70s and 80s, please send them in. But what I was talking about was, I think it's the next one. No, it's not the next one. This is the second to last. These are incredible too, aren't they, Jack? These two photographs of Sam Morrison and Virginia Morrison, shared with us by Mary Linda Schwartz.
Yeah, I had never heard of Sam Morrison until I read a book that's a biography of Elvis Presley called Last Train to Memphis. And it talks about how RCA first became aware of Elvis Presley, not from going to one of his shows, but by going to Knoxville and going to this great record store on Market Square, where they were selling Elvis records at an amazing clip. It was just an astonishing thing that in the summer of 1954, this 78 came out from Sun Records in Memphis, called "That's All Right," and it was Sam Morrison had speakers out on the square and was playing, as he always did, just to promote his records. And the movie theaters on Market Square did the same thing. They put the audio for the movie out in the square so people could be as distracted and come listen. It was a noisy place, but it was he was playing this record, "That's All Right," and people just came in. He said all ages, all races would come in and ask who is that singing on that record, because it was such an unusual sound. It was one of the first rock and roll records, and but it sold so well. It sold hundreds and hundreds of records just from this one store. They couldn't keep up with the demand. And this guy from RCA was in town, actually just scouting, because Knoxville was known for country music, and he was scouting what was going to be the next big thing, that they should be trying to sign up at RCA. And they saw this phenomenon, this retail phenomenon, not an in-person phenomenon, just a retail phenomenon. This was at the Bell Sales Company, it was called. And this was over near where Preservation Pub is today. But this was the beginning of by some accounts of well, certainly RCA's interest in Elvis, and a year later, RCA was Elvis's record label, and really made him an international phenomenon. But
more records than anybody ever, I think.
Yeah, but whether that was a good thing for Elvis and his health and career or not, I don't know. But RCA was what shot Elvis into the stratosphere in terms of fame. But it's great we didn't know until years later, Sam Morrison, I got to know his daughter. She was our first treasurer at Knoxville History Project. And we talked about her, and she shared these great photographs of her parents, both of whom worked at this family record company. Morrison's record company was very liberal, by the way. Would have a lot of the black records, the race records they called them of the day, and would just anything you wanted, they would sell it there. But forward thinking in many ways. And some concert posters. These are throwaway, and when they came out, 40 years ago. But look at REM when they played at Hobo's in 1982. That would be worth something today. It was just a Xerox image, but REM was playing to international arenas, 10 years later. And of course, the Stray Cats at the same venue, 1835 Cumberland, which I'm sorry is long since torn down and became a parking lot for a bank a few years after this.
And you were at both shows in some ways, weren't you, Jack?
What's that?
You were at both shows, weren't you?
I did. I actually bought a ticket to see REM because I was really curious about them. They were really strange sound on the radio that I had never heard anything just like it. But Hobo's, I couldn't afford a ticket to see the Stray Cats, so I watched them from the sidewalk and would see Brian Setzer leaping across the stage occasionally. But it was a long corridor out to the sidewalk, and they kept the door open so you could watch from the sidewalk if you wanted to, and were as cheap as I was.
What's cool about these? Many of you may be familiar with Paul Paris. He's the jazz maestro on WOT on Wednesday nights. And he was pulling these off. You can still see the staple marks where the staple gun went into the what do you call them? Street lamps or whatever.
Yeah, telephone poles.
Telephone poles, yeah. So Paul's got a big stack of these and graciously shared with us. The last ever performer at Hobo's was a curious rock and roller called Iggy Pop, and I know Jack was at that gig as well. You definitely got a ticket for that one, didn't you?
Yeah, it was $10. It was a lot of money for me.
That was a lot of money in '82. Yeah. Wow.
But one more thing, mentioning jazz on WOT, Smoking Dave and the Pretty Moby Dopes. You know who the lead singer for Smoking Dave was? It wasn't Dave. It was Todd Steed, who's now, of course, one of the great jazz disc jockeys announcers on WOT.
That's terrific. I think we are back down to the last one. Let's see what this is.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go. This is the last one or two.
Yeah, this is a historic concert and a nationally historic concert. I'd written about this concert before. It appears in biographies of the guy in the center that you probably recognize as Louis Armstrong. But this concert was famous because it was bombed. This was in February 1957. It was during the Clinton High crisis. There were white racists from all over the country coming here trying to stop desegregation at Clinton High because they thought it would be a domino and it would end up with the desegregation of all high schools as maybe it was a step in that direction. But there were bombings in Oak Ridge, there were bombings in Clinton. The only bombing in Knoxville was outside the Jacob Building this night. A dynamite bomb went off during the concert. I'm sure they thought they were going to disrupt the concert, but Armstrong stopped just for a moment and he said, "Don't worry, folks, it's just the telephone." And they went back to keep playing. They played at full concert. But if you look back at this an ad for it, but it's interesting to note section reserved for white and colored. Look back at the picture, and you see upstairs in the balcony. I remember in old churches, black people sat in the balcony. In some theaters like the Bijou, black people sat in the balcony. At the Jacob Building, when a black band was playing, white people sat in the balcony, and black people got the floor and they got to dance if they wanted to. And that was what it was all about. But this was a desegregated band, and I should say Martin Lang, who at the time was an art student at UT, is a furniture collector, goes to estate sales and things. But he was in Oak Ridge at an estate sale and found these pictures and thought they'd be interesting. And I looked at them and I thought, that could be the Jacob Building, and that could be the same night as the bombing. And we went to great efforts. We went to the Jacob Building with these pictures and saw that those are indeed the same railings, the same mezzanine, as you see in the Jacob building. And we also looked at the personnel in Armstrong's band, and that was exactly who was with him in 1957. So these are, without any question, are from that night at the Jacob building at Gallery Park. And there's another picture of Louis Armstrong with his trumpet. But doing a great show, maybe in spite of, or maybe just despite the people outside. He wanted them to quit. But this appears in Louis Armstrong's biographies because he had been kind of low key about civil rights up until this point. He became more outspoken after this and became a champion of civil rights during that very important era. But we're just great to have these, just thanks to Martin Lang and looking around at an estate sale. Martin Lang, by the way, was just a young guy that I knew who was studying art at UT. He's now my son-in-law. He and my daughter got married just a few months ago. So glad to have him in the family, not just because he found great pictures. He's just a good fellow. Anyway, really glad to have these in the collection, and glad that the world has these great pictures now from this kind of pivotal moment in Louis Armstrong's career. He had played here once before in Gallery Park once before, back in 1935, by the way. But this was in the modern, in the Jacob building that we know today.
That's it, Jack.
All right. Well, thanks, Paul. And thanks again to Paul for putting us together such a great show, and thanks to everybody for joining us, and thanks especially for all who've contributed pictures to Knoxville History Project for this purpose, for the Knoxville Shoebox.